Charleston had never seen a white woman dragged through the streets like that. It was late autumn, 1853, and the rain came down in hard, slanting sheets, turning Meeting Street into a river of mud and horse dung. Lanterns swung wildly in the wind, throwing jagged shadows along the brick facades. Church bells were ringing, not for worship, but for alarm. In the middle of the street, a wagon rumbled forward, surrounded by men with rifles and drunk, righteous fury. On the flatbed, hands bound in front of her, sat Arabella Rose Beaumont. Her once glorious auburn hair hung soaked and heavy around her face. The silk of her ruined gown, once the envy of Charleston, clung to her like a shroud. Blood trickled from a cut at her temple, mingling with rainwater and ash. Someone had thrown rotten vegetables at her. Someone else had spat. "Whore!" a woman hissed from a doorway. "Traitor to your race!" a man shouted. "She chose a Negro over her own," another voice snarled. In the bed of the wagon behind her, shackled to an iron ring, knelt the man they truly wanted. Elijah. Bare-chested, wrists torn raw from the cuffs, rain running in cold streams over the hard lines of his back. He knelt with his head bowed just enough to keep blood from the gash above his brow out of his eyes. His skin glowed dark bronze in the lantern light, his jaw set, his mouth a tight line of held-back fury. He could hear them. Hang him at dawn, burn the school they built, make an example. Arabella twisted against the ropes and turned, ignoring the jeers, searching for him through the storm. "Elijah," she called hoarsely over the roar of the crowd. "Look at me." He lifted his head. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between their eyes. The mob, the guns, the rain, the gallows already half-built in the square ahead. All of it fell away beneath the weight of what they had done. She had bought him for revenge. She had ended up burning Charleston to its foundations. Narrator. Before we walk deeper into this merciless judgment of love and sin, I want to know who is traveling with me tonight. From which city or country are you listening to this story? Tell me in the comments below. Months before the wagon and the rain and the half-built gallows, Charleston looked almost gentle from a distance. From the harbor, as ships from Liverpool and New York slid between the barrier islands, the city rose in pastel tiers, pink and yellow mansions with wide verandas, church steeples stabbing the sky, rows of palmetto trees lining streets that gleamed white under the southern sun. The air smelled of salt and tar and cotton bales. Ladies in hoop skirts glided along the Battery under parasols, while carriage wheels clattered over cobblestones polished by generations of wealth. It was a city that liked to think of itself as civilized. Culture, manners, music, theology. Charleston had all of these in abundance. It also had auction blocks, whipping posts, slave pens that smelled of fear and lie and human misery. But those, the fine families preferred not to talk about over supper. They all knew. They simply did not look too closely. For Arabella Rose Beaumont, the city that once felt like home now looked like a stage dressed for a play she no longer believed in. 5 years earlier, she had been its brightest ornament. At 21, she was the daughter of Edward Beaumont, a respected rice planter, and Elise Beaumont, a French-bred beauty who hosted musicales and poetry readings in their Broad Street townhouse. Arabella's hair was the color of burnished copper, her skin pale as cream despite the Carolina sun, her eyes a sharp green-gray that saw more than she let on. She had been, everyone agreed, a remarkable catch. Jonathan Price had certainly thought so. He was the son of a shipping magnate, handsome, with dark hair and a ready smile, a man whose charm flowed as easily as the claret in his father's cellar. He whispered sonnets to her under the magnolia trees, pressed her gloved hand at concerts, made promises in the shadow of St. Michael's steeple that rang with all the conviction of youth. "I'll stand by you through anything, Bella," he had said once, his forehead resting against hers in the cool darkness of the veranda. "Riches, ruin, sickness, war, I don't care. You are my choice." The ruin came sooner than either of them expected. A failed investment. A storm that wiped out Beaumont rice fields 2 years in a row. A quiet, ruthless shift in credit from one banking house to another. Edward Beaumont woke one morning to discover that his debts had been called in, bought, it turned out, by the Vandermeer family, who had long envied the Beaumont's social standing. Within 6 months, the Beaumont estate was gone. Within 8, Edward was dead by his own hand. Elise followed him to the grave within the year, her heart, as the doctor put it, simply failing. Within 12, Jonathan Price married Lydia Vandermeer, blending his family's ships with the Vandermeer cotton and reclaiming his position in Charleston society. Arabella had watched him at the wedding from the very back of St. Philip's, unseen behind a pillar, veil pulled low. When he turned to kiss his bride, she did not cry. Something inside her had already been burned out. They buried her parents. They auctioned their furniture. They whispered that it was a tragedy, but no one stepped forward to help the orphaned daughter rebuild anything, except a grandmother in Beaufort who died a year later and left Arabella, surprisingly, a modest inheritance in her own name. It was not vast, but it was enough to be dangerous in the hands of someone who no longer believed in forgiveness. Arabella invested shrewdly. She bought back a portion of the old Beaumont lands out of foreclosure and turned from rice to cotton. She hired a northern manager who understood new ginning machines, negotiated directly with factors on the wharf, and slowly, steadily multiplied what she had been given. By 26, she was one of the wealthiest unmarried women in Charleston. The city nodded at her in the street. It invited her to events because it had to, but behind her back, the whispers continued. Too cold, too proud, too clever by half. They did not see the nights she sat alone in the rebuilt drawing room of the Beaumont house, fingers curled around a glass of whiskey instead of a teacup, staring into the fireplace until the embers blurred. They did not hear the way her breath hitched when a carriage rolled past and she glimpsed a profile that looked, for one treacherous second, like Jonathan's. She had loved once. It had nearly killed her. Now she lived for something simpler, the slow, careful, devastating satisfaction of revenge. She bought cotton that undercut Vandermeer bids. She charmed certain politicians and embarrassed others. She returned to every ballroom where they had once mocked her and walked through those doors not as a ruined daughter, but as a woman who had rebuilt what men had tried to destroy. It should have been enough. It wasn't. One humid afternoon, as she rode past the old slave mart with her coachman, laughter floated from an open balcony down the street. The Vandermeer townhouse, all marble and ironwork and rose bushes. Lydia's laughter, Jonathan's deeper, familiar reply. The sound struck Arabella like a stone to the chest. They had not only survived what had killed her family, they had flourished. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the carriage window. "Stop," she said sharply. The coachman reined in the horses with a question in his eyes. Arabella stepped down, skirts brushing the hot cobblestones, and turned toward the slave mart, where a crowd had gathered under the awning. She had been there before as a child, clinging to her mother's hand, trying not to look. She had gone as an adult only when plantation business demanded it, signing papers with a clenched jaw. Today, something different moved in her. Not duty, not necessity, an idea. Inside the market, the air was thick with the smell of humanity held in too small a space. Men, women, and children stood on platforms or huddled in pens, bare feet on splintered wood, eyes hollowed by exhaustion and fear. Traders in linen coats called out ages, skills, degrees of health as if listing specifications for livestock. Strong field hand, good teeth. House girl, trained in sewing. Boy, 10 years, clever fingers for factory work. Arabella's stomach twisted. Part of her wanted to turn around, to flee back to the safer, more abstract cruelty of balance sheets and business strategies. Then she saw him. He stood slightly apart from the others, on a rough plank raised just high enough to force him into display. Tall, easily 6'3", with shoulders that spoke of years of hard labor but a bearing that did not stoop. His skin was a rich, deep brown, smooth despite the lattice of pale scars across his back. His hair curled close to his scalp, but it was his eyes that held her. Green, not hazel, not brown with a hint of green. A clear, sharp green that mirrored the sea glass she kept in a little box from childhood, the one treasure she had never sold. They were wrong on his face, according to Charleston's rules. Too striking, too telling. A legacy, no doubt, of some Irish overseer or master who had taken what he wanted and left a mark he'd never intended. Those eyes met hers. Not for a flicker, not furtively, but with a long, steady, measuring look. Slaves were not supposed to look white women in the eye. He did. A risky one, that, the trader beside her muttered, noticing her attention. Name's Elijah. 24. Strong as an ox. Clever as the devil. Been whipped twice for back talk and once for refusing to bow. Man like that can fetch $2,000 sound in body, but I'm letting him go for $800. No plantation man wants that kind of trouble in the quarters. Can he read? Arabella asked, voice calm. The trader snorted. Reads better than most white men I sell to, if you ask me. Plays the fiddle too. His old master's wife got soft-hearted and brought him in the house. Then she died, and the man sold him out of spite. That what you want, ma'am? A slave with opinions? Arabella looked up at Elijah again. He had not looked away. A slave with opinions. A man with eyes the same cutting green as hers, who had clearly tasted a different life and refused to forget it. Trouble. Perfect, something inside her whispered. I'll take him, she said. The trader blinked. Without a test? Without... I said I'll take him, Arabella repeated, her tone the same she used to close a business deal at the exchange. Have the bill of sale ready within the hour. As the trader hurried off to fetch papers, Elijah was led down from the platform, irons still clamped around his wrists. He stopped in front of her, the chain between his hands, clinking softly. Up close, she could see that his eyes weren't just green. They were watchful, wary, and beneath the wariness, defiant. You're buying me to make a scene, aren't you? He said quietly, his voice low and cultivated, more like a tutor than a field hand. To parade me somewhere I don't belong and make the fine people of Charleston choke on their own rules. The bluntness of it hit her like a slap. Most slaves would have dropped their gaze, mumbled something respectful. He did neither. At another time in her life, she might have taken offense. Today, she smiled, a thin, cold curve of the lips that did not reach her eyes. Yes, she said, I am buying you for revenge. He considered that, then nodded once. At least you're honest, he murmured. Most of your kind pretend they're doing us a kindness when they chain us up. I have never lied to myself about what this system is, Arabella said. I simply intend to use it before I help tear it down. His brows lifted, just a fraction. Ambitious, he said. Can you walk into a ball like a man who belongs there? She asked. Can you dance a waltz without staring at your own feet? Can you keep your head while every eye in the room tries to turn you into an animal? Something fierce flashed in his gaze. I can walk into any room on God's earth as if I belong, he said softly. The question, Miss Beaumont, is whether you can stand next to me when I do. For the first time in 5 years, Arabella felt the sharp, unfamiliar ache of something other than hatred, curiosity, fear, and under both, a dangerous, flickering spark of possibility. 1 week from tonight, she said, her voice like glass. Jonathan Price and his Vandermeer bride will host the largest ball of the season to celebrate their latest fortune. You will escort me there. His chain clinked as he shifted his weight. As your servant, he asked. As my escort, she said. We will give Charleston something to talk about." He studied her in a silence that seemed to stretch past the hot, foul air of the market to some cleaner, colder place. "Then I suppose," Elijah murmured, "we're both trouble." She turned away before he could see the way that word landed in her chest. Out in the street, carriages rolled past, and the Vandermeer house gleamed bright in the distance. Charleston did not yet know it, but the fuse had been lit. The first night at Beaumont Plantation should have been simple. Arabella had intended only to house Elijah, feed him, give him clothes suitable for a gentleman's escort, and begin the rigorous preparation needed to shock Charleston society. But nothing about Elijah fit simply into plans, or into silence. The rain began just after sundown, a soft patter on the roof of the rebuilt main house. Arabella walked the corridor toward the guest wing. The wing slaves were never permitted to enter, and paused outside the small bedroom she had ordered prepared for him. Her hand hovered over the door. What was she doing? Bringing a slave into the house was one thing. Giving him a gentleman's room was another. Teaching him to walk beside her rather than behind her was reckless, dangerous, social suicide, exactly why she was doing it. She knocked once. Inside, Elijah's voice came immediately. "Enter." She opened the door to find him at the window, shirt freshly laundered, cuffs rolled, the lamplight catching the strength in his arms and the raw, unashamed set of his shoulders. He didn't stand at attention. He didn't avert his gaze. He looked at her. She hated how aware she was of that gaze. "The tailor delivered clothing," she said. "You'll try them tomorrow. Tonight we begin with posture and etiquette." Elijah nodded once. "As you wish, Miss Beaumont." She stepped further in. "First lesson. When we speak publicly, you will address me as Madame Beaumont. Privately, you may say Miss Beaumont." "And what shall I call you?" he asked quietly, "when no one but the walls are listening." Her breath caught just for a moment. She would not let him see it. "You won't be speaking to me in private without permission." One corner of his mouth lifted. "But you're here without asking mine." She stiffened. "I own you." He stepped forward, not threateningly, but with a calm, terrible clarity. "You own my body," he said. "Not my mind, not my thoughts, not my voice, unless you cut it out. And I don't think you brought me here because you wanted obedience. You brought me because you wanted the world to see you do something they fear." Thunder rattled the shutters. He didn't back down, neither did she. Arabella forced her voice steady. "Sit. We need to discuss the ball." He sat, but not like a servant awaiting orders. More like a man indulging a conversation he had agreed to tolerate. "We will enter together," she said. "You will not keep your eyes on the floor. You will not lower your head. You will look like a man," he finished for her, "not property." She exhaled sharply. "Yes, exactly." "And what will you look like?" he asked. "When every woman shuns you, when every man whispers that you're ruined, when Jonathan Price stares at you like you've turned into a scandal made flesh?" Arabella's jaw tightened at the name. "I will look like I don't care." "You care," he said softly, "more than you want to admit." She stepped forward, trying to regain control of the room, of herself. "You think you understand me," she said, "but you don't know anything about me." Elijah held her gaze. "I know you're lonely." Her throat constricted. "I know you're angry," he continued. "I know you're hurt. And I know you're using me as a weapon because you don't know what else to do with all that pain." She swallowed hard. "That's enough," she said. But Elijah didn't stop. "And I know," he murmured, "that the moment we walk into that ballroom, everything in your life before this will end. You won't be the Beaumont heiress anymore. You'll be the woman who walked in with a slave." Rain pounded harder. Arabella felt the room closing around her. "Elijah," she whispered. "Stop." He did. but the truth he'd spoken stayed between them, alive and electric. She turned toward the door, desperately needing air, space, distance. But she made one mistake. She glanced back. Elijah was still watching her, not with disrespect, not with desire, with something far more dangerous. Recognition. As if he had seen the part of her she had buried under 5 years of iron resolve, and now knew exactly how fragile it was. Before she could stop herself, she whispered, "You'll learn your steps tomorrow. Good night." She left the room quickly, heart pounding, pulse trembling in her wrists. Behind her, Elijah's voice followed softly. "Good night, Miss Beaumont." It was only a polite farewell, but it felt like a beginning she wasn't ready for, a beginning she could no longer escape, slow burn, deep psychological tension. No repetition. Every interaction must heighten danger, longing, and emotional exposure. The next morning, Charleston awoke under a low blanket of fog rolling in from the harbor. The world looked muted, blurred, as if preparing itself for something it could not name. Inside Beaumont Plantation, a different kind of fog lingered, the kind that forms after a truth has been spoken, even if neither person dares confront it directly. Arabella rose earlier than usual, unable to sleep. She dressed in a deep navy gown that commanded control and descended to the ballroom where she intended to drill Elijah in waltzing. She expected stiffness. She expected resentment. She expected difficulty. She did not expect him to already be there. Elijah stood in the center of the empty room, sunlight from tall windows cutting across his frame as he practiced the opening steps of a gentleman's bow. His movements were steady, deliberate, precise. He studied the floor's reflection to perfect the angle of his shoulders, the timing of his footwork. He was teaching himself. The gesture startled her more than if he had refused to try at all. "You're early," she said. He looked up without flinching. "I figured I should practice before you arrived. Better to embarrass myself alone than in front of you." Arabella approached slowly, her heels clicking against polished oak. "You don't embarrass easily." "No," Elijah answered, "but I want to do this properly." "For my reputation?" she asked sharply. "For yours, yes," he said, "but also for mine." That simple sentence, unexpected, honest, quietly dignified, lodged itself in her chest. She positioned herself opposite him, offering her hand. Again. He took her hand, and they began. It started mechanical. 2 steps forward, 1 back, pivot, glide. His hand remained firm at her waist but distant. She kept her eyes fixed on the far wall. They did not speak. Yet, with each repetition, tension broke apart like threads snapping. Elijah moved with grace that outpaced any instruction she could give. His steps were fluid, his rhythm instinctive. Soon their bodies aligned more closely than proper distance allowed. Their breathing synced, their movements fused, and for a moment, just a breath. There was no plantation, no class divide, no color line. Only 2 people circling through a shaft of morning light. When the music, imaginary but felt, seemed to end, Arabella stepped back abruptly, heart racing. "That's enough," she said. But Elijah gently captured her wrist, not to restrain, but to steady. "No," he said quietly. "It's not." Arabella froze. Not because the grip frightened her, because it didn't. "You're trembling," Elijah said. She pulled her hand back sharply. "I'm cold." "No," he corrected gently. "You're conflicted." Anger rose, not at him, but at how clearly he saw her. "You forget your place," she snapped. Elijah straightened. "I remember it every moment. That's why I'm choosing my words carefully. I'm not trying to take your power. I'm asking why you insist on using it like armor." Her jaw tightened. "My private life is not your concern." "You brought me into that private life," Elijah said softly. "Not I." The silence in the room thickened. Arabella walked toward the window, spine rigid. I bought you for revenge. Nothing more. Don't read meaning where there is none. Behind her, Elijah didn't move, but his voice reached her, low and steady. Then why did you stay at my door last night for 3 breaths before knocking? Her hand tightened on the windowsill. Why did your voice shake when you told me good night? Her chest rose sharply. Why, he asked, are you afraid to face me now? Arabella spun around, furious. I'm not afraid of you. You're afraid of yourself, he said. They stared at each other, 2 people trapped by very different chains, and neither looked away. Then Arabella did the only thing she could to regain ground. She walked past him, opened the ballroom doors, and dismissed him for the morning. Elijah, she said without turning, you will meet me in the parlor at lunch. We have much to prepare. He nodded once. As you wish, Miss Beaumont. But something had shifted. They both felt it. Lunch in the parlor should have been straightforward. Arabella had ordered a simple meal: chicken broth, warm bread, sliced peaches. She expected Elijah to stand at attention, silent as she outlined the plan for the ball, but he didn't stand. He sat across from her, exactly as she had commanded earlier in the week to practice gentlemanly decorum. Except today, it wasn't practice. Today, it was defiance and respect at the same time. Arabella didn't correct him. She took a bite of bread, pretending her heart wasn't thudding. You will not speak unless spoken to, she said lightly. We'll rehearse conversation for the ball. Elijah folded his hands. Yes, Miss Beaumont, she began. If someone asks you where you were trained, you will say, I was taught by the wife of Senator Donnelly in Savannah, he said calmly, finishing her sentence. Arabella blinked. How did you know that's what I'd say? Because it sounds respectable, true enough not to be questioned, and flattering to you for having chosen me. She stared at him. He continued, I can anticipate your strategies, Miss Beaumont. I learned a long time ago that the best weapon a slave has is understanding the person who owns him. Arabella set her spoon down. You think this gives you power? No, Elijah said. It gives me clarity. Clarity about what? He met her eyes. About the fact that you're not cruel. You want people to think you are, but you're not. Her throat tightened. You could have whipped me, Elijah said. You didn't. You could have housed me with the others. You didn't. You could have refused to let me sit, speak, exist near you as anything other than property. Arabella's fingers curled around the tablecloth. But you didn't, he finished softly. And I know why. Stop, she whispered. Elijah leaned forward just slightly, voice low. Because you see me. Not as a slave. Not as a tool for revenge. You see me, and that terrifies you. Her breath shook. He was too close to the truth, too close to the part of her she had locked away with iron bolts and chains. Elijah, if you say another word, I won't, he said gently. Not until you ask me to. The restraint in his voice, respectful, controlled, intimate, unraveled her more than any bold declaration could have. She rose abruptly. We're done here. But as she moved to leave, he stood as well. Miss Beaumont, he said quietly. May I ask just one question? She paused. Why choose me? Elijah asked. There were dozens of slaves at that market. Why the one everyone warned you against? Why the one who looked you in the eye? Arabella turned her head, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I needed someone stronger than my hatred. She left before she could see the expression that flickered across Elijah's face. Shock, sorrow, and something dangerously close to tenderness. Over the next week, their interactions grew more complex. Arabella pushed Elijah hard, harder than any tutor would dare push a student. She corrected his posture, criticized his breathing, demanded he walk slower, Stand taller, speak more confidently. She worked him until sweat dampened his collar, but every correction she gave, he matched with a truth about her she never admitted aloud. One afternoon she corrected his speech. "Don't emphasize your vowels. It sounds southern. You need refinement." Elijah replied, "You use refinement to hide wounds, but wounds speak louder than diction." Another evening she scolded him, "You're too bold. A gentleman is reserved." He answered, "You push everyone away, Miss Beaumont, even yourself." Each exchange left her exposed. And Elijah, he never used those truths against her. He held them as carefully as if they were glass. She hated that. She needed that. Then came the night everything changed. It was late. The house was quiet. Arabella couldn't sleep, mind spinning with the ball only 3 days away. She wandered to the library, needing books, order, control, distraction. But when she opened the door, she paused. Elijah stood beside the tall shelves, holding a violin, the one that had belonged to her mother. He didn't touch it disrespectfully. He held it with a reverence that pierced her heart. "You shouldn't be in here," she whispered. He looked up. "I couldn't sleep." She stepped closer. "Put that down. It's delicate. It belonged to someone I cared for." "She must have been extraordinary," Elijah murmured, gently tracing the instrument's worn curve. Arabella's throat tightened. She was. "Do you mind," he asked softly, "if I play?" Everything in her said no, but the word that came out was, "Yes." Elijah lifted the violin with effortless familiarity. When the bow touched the strings, the first notes were low, soft, aching. Then the melody grew, sweet and aching, full of longing no words could contain. Arabella sank into a chair, her chest tightening. She had not heard music in this house, real music, full of soul, since before her mother died. Elijah's eyes closed as he played, and something in the room shifted. Walls softened, air warmed. The boundary between mistress and slave blurred like smoke. When the final note faded, Arabella whispered, "How did you learn?" Elijah opened his eyes. "My mother sang. My father was white, a man with power. He gave my mother pain, not love. But his wife heard me humming once and taught me everything she could before she died." There was so much unsaid in that confession, so much suffering, so much stolen potential. "Elijah," Arabella said softly, "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he said. "I survived. That's enough." "No," she whispered. "It isn't." Her voice broke. She turned her head, but Elijah crossed the room before she could hide the tears forming in her eyes. Without touching her, he knelt on one knee in front of her chair. Not subservience, not obedience, but solidarity. "You don't have to be strong with me," he murmured. Arabella trembled. Her walls cracked, and for the first time in 5 years, someone saw her raw and unguarded. "Elijah," she whispered, voice shaking, "I don't know how to stop hating. I don't know how to forgive the world for what it took from me." Elijah looked up at her. "Let me help you," he said softly. "Let me hold some of that weight." Her breath caught. She didn't move for a long moment. Then she reached out, hesitantly, almost fearfully, and placed her hand on his cheek. Elijah closed his eyes at her touch, exhaling shakily. "Miss Beaumont," he whispered. "Arabella," she corrected. He opened his eyes, and everything inside her unraveled. "Arabella," he repeated. Her name sounded like a vow on his lips. She leaned down. He leaned up. Their foreheads touched first. Their breaths mingled. Every rule of Charleston, every law of the South, every doctrine of race, class, power, all of it trembled. "Elijah," she whispered, "tell me to stop." "I can't," he whispered back. And when their lips touched, it wasn't passion that consumed them, it was recognition. Two broken people, two lonely souls, two hearts that had no right to find each other, and yet did. The kiss was gentle at first, unbearably tender, then deeper, fuller, desperate with the knowledge of everything they risked. Arabella pulled away only when breath failed her. Her forehead rested against his. "This is madness," she whispered. "Yes," Elijah murmured. "But it's the first thing that's felt real." She shook with fear and longing. "I don't know what comes next." Elijah rose slowly, cupping her face with both hands. "Then let's find out together," he said. The world outside remained unchanged, harsh, cruel, unforgiving. But inside the quiet library, beneath the glow of a single lamp, something forbidden and fragile bloomed. Something that would change everything, something worth fighting for. The morning after that first kiss arrived with a cruel sense of clarity. The world had not changed, the danger had not lessened, but something inside Arabella had irrevocably shifted. She woke with the memory of Elijah's hands cupping her face, his lips brushing hers, the trembling breath they shared afterward. It was both a balm and a blade, soothing and terrifying at once. For hours she avoided him. She sat in her study, staring at account books she couldn't read. She drank tea that went cold. She read the same sentence in a letter from the Charleston Ladies' Council 6 times without absorbing a word. She was no longer planning a performance for revenge. She was no longer playing a role. She was falling, deeply, dangerously. By noon, she forced herself to resume composure and walked to the parlor for Elijah's next rehearsal. But Elijah wasn't alone. At least 6 members of the Charleston Genteel Ladies' Circle stood on her porch, fans fluttering like angry butterflies. Their leader, Mrs. Caldwell, a woman with a face permanently pinched by both corsets and judgment, stepped forward. "Miss Beaumont," she said sharply, "we need a word." Arabella braced herself. "What is this about?" Whispers, gasps, dramatic sighs spread through the group. Mrs. Caldwell lifted her chin. "It has come to our attention that you have been allowing a male slave inside your home." Arabella's heart lurched. "And furthermore," Mrs. Caldwell continued, voice dripping with moral outrage, "that you intend to bring this same slave as your escort to the Vandermeer ball, like a white gentleman." Another woman chimed in. "It's indecent, unnatural, an insult to our entire society." Arabella's grip tightened on the doorframe. "I owe none of you an explanation." "On the contrary," Mrs. Caldwell snapped, "you owe this entire city one. People are saying you have lost your sense of decency, that you have become unhinged." A third woman hissed, or worse, corrupted. Arabella inhaled slowly, preparing to dismiss them. But that was when the front door behind her opened. Elijah stepped into the hallway, wearing the tailored vest she had given him, sleeves rolled, posture straight. He had come to meet her for the day's lesson. The ladies gasped as if a tornado had swept through the house. "There," one screeched, "look at him, in the mistress's home." Mrs. Caldwell spoke again, but this time her voice shook with fury. "Miss Beaumont, this will ruin you." Arabella met Elijah's eyes across the hallway, eyes that flickered with warning, fear, and something else, determination. "Leave my property," Arabella said coldly, "before I have you removed." "You dare," Mrs. Caldwell sputtered. Arabella stepped closer, radiating the same icy authority that once built the Beaumont empire. "Yes," she said, "I dare." The women recoiled. One by one, their fans snapped shut like weapons sheathed in defeat. They stormed off the porch in a flurry of silk and indignation. When the last carriage rolled away, Arabella shut the door and leaned against it, trembling. Elijah spoke first. "You shouldn't have defended me like that." "I had to," she said. "No," he answered softly. "You chose to." She looked up slowly, chest tight. "Elijah, People are watching. They're suspicious. And if anyone discovers what happened last night, they'll kill me," he finished calmly. Arabella flinched as though struck. Elijah stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you so you understand the stakes. They will hang me for less than what we did. For a rumor, a whisper, a look, and now—" His eyes darkened. "Now the whispers have begun." Arabella's breath faltered. "What can we do?" "Be careful," he said. "Be distant, at least in public." The words stabbed her, even though they were necessary. "And in private?" Elijah hesitated. "That depends on what you want." She stared at him, her pulse hammering. What she wanted was clear. What she could have was not. "Elijah," she said, voice trembling, "I don't want to stop seeing you." He exhaled shakily. "Then we need to be smarter. If anyone sees us alone, if anyone sees even a trace of what we feel, there will be consequences neither of us can survive." As he spoke, heavy boots thudded outside. Fast, purposeful, familiar. Arabella froze. Jonathan Price burst through the front gate, face flushed, jaw clenched, breath coming hard with rage. "Elijah," Arabella whispered, "go, now." Elijah vanished down the back corridor with silent speed honed from years of being hunted by eyes that saw him as less than human. Jonathan reached the porch and slammed his fist against the door. "Arabella," he shouted, "open this door." Her blood ran cold. He knew something, or suspected enough to destroy her. She steadied her hands, inhaled once, and opened the door. Jonathan stormed inside without permission. "Where is he?" Arabella kept her face still. "Where is who?" Jonathan's eyes burned with accusation. "Your slave," he growled. "The one you paraded at the market, the one you're passing off as some kind of—" He stopped himself only to spit the word. "Equal." Arabella folded her arms. "You have no right to demand anything here." Jonathan stepped closer, lowering his voice with poisonous intensity. "Oh, but I do, because people are talking, people are whispering, they're saying you've lost your mind, that you're consorting with that slave, that you've—" He leaned in. "Shared your bed with him." Arabella's heart slammed violently against her ribs. Jonathan's face twisted with hatred. "And if that rumor is true," he hissed, "they will hang him from the highest tree in Charleston, and they will lock you in the asylum where women like you belong." His voice cut like a blade. "This is your last warning, Arabella. Release him, sell him, punish him. Do whatever you must to put an end to this madness." He pointed a shaking hand at her. "If you don't, I will." He left without waiting for her response. The door slammed. Arabella collapsed into the nearest chair, shaking uncontrollably. From the hallway's shadows, Elijah emerged slowly. "You see," he whispered. "The noose is tightening." Her tears fell silently. "Elijah," she breathed, "what do we do now?" He knelt in front of her, taking her hands with a reverence that broke her heart. "Now," he said, voice steady despite the danger, "we fight. Not with revenge, not with pride, with strategy, and with love." Arabella closed her eyes, knowing the truth he dared speak aloud. Their secret was no longer safe. Their time was running out. The world was closing in. And what came next would either save them or destroy everything they had left. Charleston had always simmered with judgment, but now it boiled. By the second morning after Jonathan's warning, the plantation felt like a throat tightening around Arabella. Servants whispered. Riders passed the gate more slowly than usual. Even the air hung heavy, as if the whole city were holding its breath, waiting for her to fall. Arabella stood at her bedroom window, watching clouds gather over the marshes. She felt Elijah's presence before she heard his footsteps. "You haven't eaten," he said quietly from the doorway. She didn't turn. "I can't." Elijah stepped closer, but still kept a respectful distance, close enough to protect her, far enough not to place her in more danger. "Jonathan won't stop," he said. "You know that." "Yes." Her fingers dug into the window frame. "I know what he is capable of." Elijah hesitated. "There's something you haven't told me." Arabella stiffened. He continued softly. "When Jonathan spoke to you, he wasn't speaking like a man defending society. He spoke like a man defending a personal wound. What happened between you two?" The words struck a place inside her she had long sealed away. She turned, eyes hollow. "He wasn't just a suitor, Elijah. He was my fiancé." Elijah's expression barely changed, but something in the air cracked. Arabella swallowed. "We were to marry in 1848, a match everyone in Charleston approved of. Until my father's collapse, the scandal, the bankruptcy, and Jonathan, who once swore he'd love me no matter what, married Christine Vandermeer within months." Elijah's jaw tightened. "So he abandoned you when you had nothing." "He did worse," Arabella whispered. "He helped engineer the bankruptcy. His new in-laws wanted our land for their shipping expansion. Jonathan knew and said nothing." Elijah exhaled through his nose slowly, rage building like a tide. "That man has no claim over your life." "No," Arabella said, "but Charleston believes otherwise. He is society's golden son." "And you're the woman they want to shatter," Elijah murmured. "Yes," she whispered, "if it means preserving their rules." A knock thundered through the house. Arabella froze. Elijah moved first, placing himself between her and the door with instinctive protectiveness. Footsteps echoed. Voices. Men. Henry, the old steward, rushed upstairs. "Miss Bella, they've come." "Who?" Arabella demanded. Henry's face tightened. "The Charleston Moral Committee, and Mr. Jonathan Price is leading them." Her blood ran cold. They were here to take Elijah, or take her. "Go to the cellar," she whispered to Elijah. "Now." Elijah shook his head. "If I run, they'll claim guilt. If I hide, they'll burn this house searching." "They'll kill you," she hissed. "And if you're dragged out of here alone, what do you think they'll assume?" he countered. Arabella's hand trembled against his chest. "Elijah, please." He touched her hand gently. "If they come for me, let them see a man, not a frightened fugitive." The front door slammed open downstairs. The sound of boots marched in. Jonathan's voice rang through the hall. "Arabella Beaumont, bring out your slave." Elijah straightened. Arabella gripped his arm. "Don't." Elijah turned to her, voice low and calm. "Whatever happens, look at me, not them." She couldn't breathe. He walked out of the bedroom and descended the staircase alone. Arabella followed, every step a prayer. The foyer was full, Jonathan at the front, flanked by men with rifles. Behind them, Mrs. Caldwell and 4 other ladies pretended to faint with moral outrage while positioning themselves for the best gossip. Jonathan pointed at Elijah with venom. "There he is. Brought him into your home, gave him privileges above his station. You disgrace yourself." Elijah stood straight, taller than every man in the room, his expression unreadable. Arabella stepped between them before Jonathan could get closer. "You have no authority here," she said. Jonathan sneered. "Charleston gives me every authority I need. We're taking him to the city jail until a formal inquiry is held for crimes against public morality." Arabella's voice broke. "He has committed no crime." Jonathan leaned in. "You keep saying he as if he is a person. He is property, and if you won't discipline your property, we will." Elijah spoke then, voice deep and steady. "I belong to myself," he said. The room gasped. Jonathan's eyes flashed with delighted malice. "You hear that? Insolence. Proof enough for the chains." He motioned to the 2 armed men behind him. Elijah, Arabella whispered. Don't move. Please. Jonathan smirked. Ah, there it is. He looked around at the committee. See how she speaks to him, as if he's her equal. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a hiss. Tell me, Arabella, did he touch you? Did he lie in your bed? Did you betray your race for him? Because that is the only reason you'd be fighting like this. Elijah's fists curled at his sides, but he stayed still, honoring Arabella's plea. Arabella lifted her chin. Yes, she said. The room erupted. Shrieks, curses, chaos. Jonathan staggered back. You admit it? I admit, Arabella said, voice shaking but resolute, that I care for him more than I ever cared for the coward who abandoned me. A deadly silence fell. Jonathan's face flushed with rage. Then he dies. He reached for the rifle on the nearest man. In that instant, Elijah moved, not toward Jonathan, but toward Arabella, pulling her behind him as gun barrels rose. Don't! Arabella screamed. Jonathan cocked the rifle. Elijah met his eyes. If you kill me, you prove everything Arabella said about you, a coward who preys on the powerless. Jonathan's trigger finger twitched. Then, Henry's voice roared through the room's tension. Enough! Everyone turned. The old steward stepped forward, trembling with age but fierce in spirit, holding a sealed packet of papers. This, Henry said, is a manumission deed, signed by Miss Beaumont this morning. Elijah is a free man. Arabella gasped. Henry, how? He bowed his head. I saw the danger coming, and I acted. Jonathan's face twisted. Forgery, lies. Henry pressed the document into the hands of the committee's deputy, who read it aloud. Elijah Beaumont, manumitted by Arabella Rose Beaumont. Effective immediately. Irrevocable. A murmur passed through the room. The law was clear. A free man could not be seized without trial. Jonathan's grip on the rifle faltered, but his rage did not. You may have bought him freedom, he spat, but you can't save your own name. The city will judge you. The courts will judge you. You and your bastard liaison will be cast out of every circle that matters. Arabella stepped beside Elijah, taking his hand openly. We do not belong to your circle, she said. Jonathan stared at their joined hands, white and dark, like witnessing the collapse of everything he believed unchallenged. He turned and stormed out, the committee trailing in scandalized silence. The door slammed violently behind them. Arabella's knees nearly buckled. Elijah caught her, pulling her close. It's done, he whispered. No, she said, voice cracking. It's only beginning. Because now Charleston knew everything. And the city did not forgive. They didn't have hours. They barely had minutes. As soon as Jonathan and the committee vanished through the gate, Elijah turned toward Arabella, not with relief, not with triumph, but with the cold, clear vision of a man who had lived too long on the edge of danger. They'll be back, he said. Not with gossip this time, with warrants, with militia, with rope. Arabella nodded, throat tight. I know. And when they come, Elijah continued, they won't care that I'm free. They'll say the deed was forged. They'll claim you're unfit, a danger to yourself, and they'll lock you away. Her pulse hammered. Then we run. Elijah stepped forward, cupping her face gently. Are you certain? This is your home, your legacy, everything you rebuilt. Arabella pressed her forehead to his chest, anchoring herself in the steady thrum of his heartbeat. What good is a legacy, she whispered, if I lose the man I love? Elijah closed his eyes, just for a breath. When he opened them, resolve burned through the fear. Then we leave tonight. The plantation moved like a living thing preparing for war. Henry summoned trusted servants, those loyal to the Beaumonts, for decades. Sarah, one of the housemaids Arabella had quietly educated in reading, gathered supplies. Bags were filled, horses saddled, money counted. The sun had barely set before the first rumor reached them. Riders heading this way. Jonathan gathering men. Talk of lawful seizure. Arabella stood in the foyer, wearing a traveling cloak over a simple dress. She looked at the portraits on the walls, generations of Beaumonts staring back with powdered wigs and stern eyes. "Elijah," she whispered, "I'm ready." He took her hand. "Then let's go." But before they reached the door, Henry stepped forward. "Miss Bella," he said quietly, "there's something you need." He pressed an envelope into her hand, sealed with wax bearing her grandmother's crest. "Your grandmother gave this to me before she passed," Henry said. "Told me to keep it for a day when you'd need strength more than pride." Arabella opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter in her grandmother's elegant script. "My dearest Arabella, if you are reading this, you're standing at a doorway between the life you were raised for and the life you were meant for. Choose love. Choose courage. The world will always try to decide for you. Do not let it." Arabella pressed the letter to her heart, tears burning her eyes. Elijah took her hand again, more firmly this time. "We ride." But as they turned toward the back exit, where Sarah waited with horses ready, boots thundered outside. Arabella gasped. "They're early." Elijah pulled her close to the wall, motioning for silence. Through the window, torches flickered. Dozens of riders, the sound of guns being loaded. Jonathan's voice shouting orders. Sarah rushed in, breathless. "They're coming through the fields." Elijah's mind worked fast. "We can't outrun them on open ground. We go through the marsh trails, narrow paths only locals know." Henry nodded. "Jacob knows them better than any man alive. He's been waiting with the horses." Arabella felt Elijah's arm wrap protectively around her as they slipped through the servants' exit into the night. The marsh wind was sharp and wet, carrying the scent of salt and mud. Fireflies glittered along hidden water channels. In the distance, dogs barked. Hunters. Jacob appeared from the shadows with 3 horses. "Follow me. Stay quiet." Arabella mounted behind Elijah, arms wrapped tight around his chest. His hand closed over hers. "Hold on," he whispered. "We're leaving the world behind." They rode into darkness. Behind them, shouts cut through the night. "They're escaping." "Find the slave. Bring the woman back alive." Elijah kicked the horse faster. Arabella buried her face against his back, tears torn away by the wind. Hours later, the torches grew distant. The dogs fell silent. The marsh swallowed all sound. They didn't stop until they reached a small fishing dock used by freedmen and smugglers. A boat waited, lantern dimmed. Jacob tied the horses and looked at Elijah and Arabella. "This is as far as I go," he said. Arabella gripped his hands. "Jacob, thank you for everything." He tipped his head. "Just living the freedom we all fighting for." Elijah helped Arabella into the boat, then stepped in after her. The oarsman pushed off. As the boat drifted into the black expanse of the river, Arabella leaned into Elijah, exhausted, terrified, relieved. "Elijah," she whispered, "where will we go?" He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "North," he said softly, "where no law can claim us, where no man can separate us, where freedom isn't a dream, but a beginning." Arabella closed her eyes, resting her head on his chest. The marsh wind carried their fate away from Charleston, away from chains, judgment, and fire, and toward a future no one had written for them, a future they would write themselves. The river carried them onward, its dark waters whispering promises neither of them dared to speak aloud. Behind them, Charleston raged. Torches, rumors, punishment, the thunder of a society that could not imagine a world where a white woman and a black man chose each other. Ahead lay a horizon without guarantees. Freedom was not a gentle country. It was wild, uncertain, and often cruel. But as Arabella leaned into Elijah's steady heartbeat, she understood something she had never known in all her years of wealth and pride. Home was not a house, not a legacy, not a place society approved. Home was the arms she rested in now. Their journey was only beginning, and the world outside would test them again and again. But for this one stolen moment on the open water, they had peace. The story ends here, but the ache of that era still lingers. How are you feeling right now? Are you listening to this alone or with someone? Tell me where in the world you are as you take in this final breath of their journey.